with Renee. Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to Black Liberation Media and a special edition of Saturdays with Renee, of course, on a Thursday to talk about the expansion of U.S. imperialism and aggression in the world war, et cetera, and so forth, and an attack on Iran. Renee Johnston is our host, of course. I'm Jared Ball, and we have, I think, at least one right now, and maybe another special guest will be joining us in a moment. Welcome to you both. Renee, greetings, and
peace.
I turn it
Thank
over.
You. I'm mad you said the host, Renee. What are you talking about?
What do you mean?
What I say? I ain't alone, sucker.
Oh, I mean, you the host, the co-host, I'm just, scrambling, my bad.
I believe Essam is also going to join. We'll keep an eye for him to pop up on, back there. I am unfortunately on the road, which was unexpected, but, the life of having a child who can't drive themselves means you pick up and drop off and pick up and drop off and pick up and drop off.
And Essam is in fact here, so welcome.
Fabulous.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I really appreciate you both joining. And Navid, am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it Navid?
It's Navid.
Navid. Apologies. Thank you.
No worries at all.
So we've been having these kind of in part conversations about what's happening in Iran, and Saturday we were pre-recorded, and so of course when all of this started we were pre-recorded and we did not have an opportunity to discuss it at all. I am not a expert by any means at all in foreign policy. I just know that we live in the empire, in the belly of the beast, and I'm sick of it, sick to death of the whole thing, to be frank. But Essam has always been such a gracious guest with his time and knowledge. And so when I suggested to Jared, what do you think of trying to just jump on someday this week and see if we can get Essam back and try and parse out some of these real contradictions that are showing this expansion of the empire that's happening. All the basic things. Of course, Essam, being somebody who doesn't mind my harassment, said absolutely, and then said, but what if I bring on one of the spicy Iranians that I know to join? And so I appreciate, Navid, you agreeing to join as well. I don't know how familiar you are with the show, but we'll start off and let you both introduce yourselves. Essam's a little more, I think this is like time 3, 4 that you've been on, so people are a little more used to you. So you can go first, and then you can turn it over to Navid to just tell everybody who you are, kind of where you come from in this as this situates itself, and then we can really just dig in.
Yes, no, thank you so much again for graciously having me again. And I think the term that I use, not spicy, but feisty. And I think, and I don't use that term just generously on anybody. I truly mean it. Navid and Nina both have been very tremendous comrades in not in academic circles only, but also showing solidarity with people of the global South. And I've learned so much from their work in reference to Sanctions that I'm sure once Navid speaks, we'll speak a little bit about that. But yeah, my name is EssamElkorghli. I'm in Illinois currently, Urbana-Champaign University of Illinois. I'm from Libya, so I'm an international student. So I know the precarity of it all. And this is my 6th year doing the PhD and now finishing up. Actually, I think my defense date will be in a month or so. And I focus largely on the geopolitical economy of textbooks in Libya. That's the main focus. So I'm an education specialist, if one could call it that. And I do different work related to Pan-Africanism. I'm part of the global Pan-African movement, and I write largely for Pambazuka News and Black Agenda Report, which I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with. So please, Navid, thanks for joining us, and thank you for joining on not only such a short notice, but also harsh times to be an Iranian or a person who stands against imperialism. So please, yeah, the floor is yours. Right.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to Renee and Jared for inviting me to be on the show. Thank you to Essam for the kind words and for connecting us as well. My name is Navid Farnia. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Wayne State University in Detroit. Broadly, my work is on the relationship between racial oppression in the United States and U.S. imperialism. As Essam mentioned, I'm part of a group of people on the International People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism, which we did work on sanctions and how unilateral sanctions impacted global South countries. So there's that, and then I'm also a co-founder of the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective. So yes, I'm happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. So I guess Jared, I don't know if you have a starting spot specifically, that you had in mind. For me, I think I'd like us maybe first to just start with the general, so people have a general understanding of what this quote unquote war. I always hesitate to use these terms with things because what this really is a geopolitical attack on a sovereign nation in an attempt to prevent it from having any level of self-determination, right? And so, when we have empires attacking nations in order to prevent them from thriving in the ways that they so choose, like when you have to defend against that, I'm like, is it really a war? Why are we attacking them to begin with? So maybe if we could just start there with kind of the broad base of what, just for the audience to have a clear understanding of what is, how did this happen on Saturday morning that the U.S. and the Zionist state decided that they were going to stop dropping bombs on Iran? And Navid, maybe you could start.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a story that's basically been 47 years in the making, right? Ever since the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the United States has had an adversarial relationship with Iran, and that includes the imposition of sanctions for over 40 years. That includes arming and supplying Iran's adversaries in the region. That includes, imperial encirclement, all these military bases that litter the region, that lead to the occupation of all these countries in West Asia. And so what happened this past weekend was really decades in the making, right? Because there's been discussions at least since the early 2000s about some kind of attack against Iran, military attack against Iran. Now, what led, why in this moment in particular? I think one of the strategic calculations of the United States and the Zionist entity was that Iran is weaker now than it has been since its nascent existence, right? They calculated that given the fall of Assad in Syria, an ally of Iran, given the strategic retreat of Hezbollah in Lebanon, another ally of Iran, given the genocide and the genocidal war against the Palestinian people and the attacks on the Palestinian resistance, they felt that all these factors led to a weakened position of Iran that made it ripe for attack, right? Beyond that, I will say, the other aspect of this, and this is the sort of an underlying aspect of all of this, is that Iran, as you pointed out, Renee, is a reflection after the revolution of self-determination and sovereignty, the ability to build itself up and become a self-reliant state that protects its people, that serves its people, emphases on education, infrastructural development, welfare, these kinds of things. All these things that fly in the face of what imperialism intends to do in all these regions throughout the world, right? And in fact, during the during the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq from 1980 to 1988, in which the U.S. was supporting Iraq, Iran, and Essam, I think might talk about this as well, Iran was receiving assistance, not a lot of assistance, but receiving assistance from, for example, Libya and under Gaddafi, from Syria, and from North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And it received small batches of, for example, missiles. But rather than employing all those missiles as it received them, it would reverse engineer, it would take 1 or 2 missiles aside to study them and reverse engineer them in order to develop its own endogenous political missile program, right? And that ultimately became one of the most robust missile programs in the world. And we're now actually seeing it unfold and play out in front of our eyes as the U.S. attacks bases throughout. As Iran attacks U.S. bases throughout the region in Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, UAE, so on and so forth. And of course, its biggest and most important military base, which is the Zionist entity itself. And so that's kind of how we got to this moment. The strategic calculation, again, as I said, was that Iran would be ripe for attack and that it would capitulate after it was attacked, perhaps in like a Venezuela type model. That has not played out at all. And we can talk more about why that is the case. But that's kind of how we got here.
Thank you. Essam, you all from the Global Pan-African Movement posted what I thought was a very in-depth statement once this started to happen, that covered a lot of how some of the international bodies played a sincere role in causing this to happen. And unfortunately, I'm driving, so I don't have the statement in front of me, but do you want to talk a little bit about the international response to what's happening and kind of how, I guess, the toothless nature of so many of these international bodies have allowed this type of act to actually occur?
Yeah, and I think actually I'm very grateful again for Navid and Nina and all the other comrades on the anti-sanctions movement, I guess, that we're trying to build a world where financial coercive measures are not being applied. So in that group, somebody who we have friends who are part of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers, I think. And early morning, as soon as this vicious bombardment of Iran began, it was shared a statement condemning it, and it historicized one key thing, which is the function of the International Agency for Atomic Energy. Again, I might be messing up the abbreviation, but it's IAEA, and its role in legitimizing the discourse that is very common in the U.S. and much of the Western world that Iran is a bad country because it has nuclear weapons, and the fact, just like when the invasion of Iraq took place, what people, after spending many years occupying the country, they said we couldn't find any nuclear weapons. But then these war hawks, they say the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. And so with the IAEA statements, both before the 12th Day War, which is the war that took place in June 2025, when the Zionists preemptively, it's never preemptively, they attacked Iran, and the U.S. joined them eventually. They said 2 days before that or so, they launched a statement saying, "Oh, by the way, we don't know if Iran is actually developing nuclear weapons or not. We cannot prove it." And then again, before this attack took place, they published another statement that says that. But I don't have an account to write in the chat the whole comment that Benjamin Netanyahu said back in 2002 when he was U.S. Congress, right, speaking to U.S. Congress officials. Maybe you can share it, Jared or Renee, that I wrote a private chat with the comments inside everybody. And essentially what he said back in 2002, remember this, right? He testified in U.S. Congress and was asked if the U.S. should launch preemptive attacks on any nation. He answered, Benjamin Netanyahu said, "Are there other nations developing nuclear weapons? Yes. Let me say what they are. The two nations that are vying and competing with each other, who will be first to achieve nuclear weapons are Iraq and Iran. And Iran is also outpacing Iraq in developing ballistic missile system. A third nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya, while no one is watching under the cloak, is trying very rapidly to build an atomic bomb capability. So you have now 3 nations. And what was the pretext to go and invade Libya is that supposedly there was Libya actually, the physicist here, nuclear physicist who work with the war hawks and the neoconservatives, they call it the Libya syndrome. The United States created something called the Libya syndrome in negotiations with nuclear countries or governments or states that have nuclear capabilities or thinking about developing them. And then they say, well, Libya handed its weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons and ballistic missiles. They handed them to the US in good faith. After negotiations, they said, okay, do you want to be peaceful? Here's us with good faith. We're going to give you the weapons. What happened 7 years after that? NATO came and bombed Libya, right? So there wasn't nuclear weapons. It was the fact that Libya was one of the stumbling blocks for complete imperialist expansion in Northern Africa. And so, okay, so now North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, probably saying, see, Libya, you shouldn't have done that, right? And I think a lot of people are actually saying that Iran, even though that there is no proof that, a country has nuclear weapons or not, but it's the fact that you have a Netanyahu coming out and saying we need to attack these 3 countries, not because they have nuclear weapons, it's because what they represent reference to imperialism. And so, and then also they have to speak also about NATO. If you recall, last year, me and Matteo, we have Matteo Capasso, who's a very good friend of ours. We tend to write every year, whenever there's a NATO summit, an analysis of it, and we tend to publish it on Black Agenda Report. So if you're interested, feel free to go there and check it out. But when we look at the summit of NATO in 2025, it took place during or right after the bombing of Iran during the 12-day war. And everybody, Mark Rutte, everybody is just regurgitates the statement that Israel and the United States have the right to do what they're doing, a preemptive attack, because Iran should never have nuclear weapons. It's just like that's kind of the same talking point: nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons. And the fact that they cannot prove that they don't have nuclear weapons, they constantly say that we need to be at state of war against Iran. But just like Navid articulated quite well, in my view, it's not just about nuclear weapons. It's what Iran and the revolution from 1979 represents. And not only represents for the Shia people or Muslims, it represents for the global South. I mean, before 1979, Iran used to support the apartheid in South Africa. Iran used to be in bed with Israel, and their intelligence was intermingled with Israel. The Safak forces and how they oppressed the Iranians. And they were actually, I was reading about this recently, that even women, like in Iran, they were forced to take off their hijab, right? So, and all of these issues about women and freedom and so forth, it's very complex. And I think Navid can speak about that. So what it means for us, the people of Global South, Iran, is not just this Islamic or Shia country. It's actually civilizationally what it means to us and what they have contributed to even liberation movements in much of the Global South cannot be just mentioned in my brief intervention here. So
thank you. So there's so much. Like I'm almost struggling to get myself together because I am frustrated at all times. And Navid, I watched you and your sister on with Adnan. I think that was like Sunday. And I don't even remember who said it, but I was like, that's exactly what this blatant arrogance of the West to always make the assumption. There's always 2 assumptions that seem to guide all these decisions. The first assumption is we can have, but you can't have, right? So we're allowed to have nukes, we're allowed to have bombs, we're allowed to defend ourselves, we're allowed whatever whatever they the Western, imperialists always say. But no one else is allowed to do the same, right? The other point of arrogance that it's the caucasity of it that just drives me crazy is this assumption that everybody is just waiting for the West to come and take over and do what they want. And you must, as someone who is not participating in the imperial structure, just lay down and just give them whatever they want, right? You're not, there's never a presumption that there will be a plan, that there will be a response, that there are people who actually care about their freedom. None of that ever comes into play when these things happen. And so then you end up with these people who are shocked. Like, you know, we played a clip of, I think it was like the NBC report, and she was like, well, you know, you all don't think it's bad that you're bombing, you know, these U.S. bases in around the world if you're not. And the guy was like, what do you, like, you're bombing us. Like, what did you think was going to happen? And so this constant assumption of who is allowed to have and who is allowed to make decisions, and the arrogant belief that people who are not the white part of the white imperialist structure don't have the capacity to fight back. So I don't know if there's even really a question in there, but I mean, when you're looking at the structure of all these things, are you seeing, like, is it me, or are you also seeing this as like a massive problem with how the Western world deals with the global South?
No, I agree. It's a problem with how the Western world deals with the global South. So, to your point of like we as the West, we as, you know, as the white West can have such and such, but, you know, global South peoples, Black and brown and indigenous peoples around the world can't have these things. I actually think of, for example, the South Africa, the apartheid regime in South Africa. The apartheid regime had nuclear bombs. But when they were transitioning to majority rule, to Black majority rule, they dismantled the nuclear program in South Africa so that, you know, like as if like Black people cannot be trusted with nukes, right? And so like, absolutely, I see that, Renee. To your other point about like, you know, people fighting back, right? Like there was, I think NBC News conducted an interview with Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araqchi, today. And they asked him, like, what do you think of the prospect of U.S. troops ground troops invading Iran? And he just like, he smiled and he said, we're waiting for them. And the interviewer was like speechless in terms of almost as if like, how could he respond in this way, right? Like that they're going to defend their land and they're going to defend their sovereignty, right? Meanwhile, like you have Marines here in the United States, like who are like, you know, protesting, like, and their arms are being broken by sitting U.S. senators. Like there was a video yesterday of all this, right? So like, you know, like
wait, what was that?
Okay, yeah. So there was
I missed that. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a video that came out yesterday of like a U.S. Marine dressed in his attire. I don't know what the actual occasion was, what it was like some sort of council meeting or whatever it was, but he was protesting and saying like, you know, we don't want to fight another war like this, and I think he said it along the lines of we don't want to fight a war for Israel or something like that. But as he was saying it, like there were like cops, and then cops that were trying to pull him out of the room, and there was also, I think, a U.S. senator also like was trying to take him down, and he was holding on to the door, and like his arm got stuck, and I think his arm was broken. So like, you know, this is day 6, day 5? I mean, and this is already happening, right? Like, and I mean, and so in reality, like it's not going well for the United States. It's not going well for the Zionists, no matter how much they try to propagandize and everything, right? But like the point is, and to bring it back to what you're saying, Renee, is that like, you know, anytime the peoples of the global South fight back, right? It's almost as if like, you know, yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, it's the caucasity of it, right? Like to think that they can't and should not fight back, right? Dating back to, you know, the colonization of the Americas, dating back to the Haitian Revolution. These, you know, all of these events, like, you know, are part of this historical trajectory and tradition of the West, to think that they could just massacre peoples, and that these people are not going to fight back. And then anytime they do fight back, then they cite, for example, international law. Then they cite, you know, like all these things like of moral, the moral compass of these people, right? And all these things, right? But one of the things about this whole international law discussion, right, is that, you know, all of us in here know that like the United States and Europe have been violating international law as long as international law has existed, right? Like, and even before it existed, of course, like they were doing all these things, right? But now, ever since like there's now basically with the genocide in Palestine, not only has it been live streamed, but they're actually flaunting their violations of international law, right? And so now that Iran is hitting back and actually hitting, for example, embassies, which is one of the things that the Zionists did against the Iranian consulate in Syria in 2024. Now that Iran is hitting embassies, you know, like they can't go back to international law because they were flaunting their violations of international law, right? So we're seeing in real time like the crumbling of these international structures, which, by the way, the West designed for the purpose of the West itself, but they're crumbling in real time, and they can't do anything about it. So, I mean, that's why it's not going
well. Forgive me. I don't mean to derail or interrupt, but we've had many requests for this, so I did find it. So let me just.
What's the fight for Israel?
Jared, if you're talking, you're muted.
No, I stopped talking. Ooh. Wow. Oh, there were several. Oh, there was another one in uniform. Oh, wow. Okay. Hey. Well, anyway, I don't have any commentary. I have nothing to add to that. I just we had it requested and wanted to bring that up. So again, forgive me for derailing or interrupting. But
no, yeah, I think the other thing that recently I've been sitting here at the University of Illinois. We have a week of screening of films on the Battle of Quito Canavale in Angola, and the role of Cuba and how it combated the actual South African Boers, you know, who were fighting inside Angola and sending their troops across southern Africa to quell these liberation movements that were taking place. And I think the thing that the American public does not want to, especially the war hawks, right, that they don't want to speak about is that the fact, just like in South Africa, the Boers, once the body bags started to come back with white people inside them, that's when they realized that they cannot continue this barbaric behavior. And I think right now, I mean, with as much solidarity and how much love and appreciation I have for so many people and here in the United States, there should be like a movement that's just like with just one person doing that and speaking up. But there should be a movement that we don't want body bags, be it in the countries that are being attacked or the people here. There should be loud voices speaking against this. And it's not even about like, oh, now we're an advanced warfare system that you can just sit somewhere in Texas and shoot a drone. There are people on the way that they can also be targeted because they're on the crossfire, and they also are defending imperialism. And I think this is the crucial point also in the discursivity of this war. And excuse the little bit of this academic language, but you know, when you look at the NATO documents that they have been publishing since 2021, they say that now we went to the sphere of cognitive warfare, where that historical facts and everything, they're never articulated in public media or in information warfare, and everything starts as soon as the incident starts to happen. So look at what media is saying. Iran is attacking its sovereign neighbors. Iran, like, and so what is the key thing? It's kind of like everything started at October 7th. Nobody wants to speak about what happened before. So right now, everybody does not talk about what happened on Saturday morning when we all woke up and saw that Iran is being bombed, or the Iranians themselves waking up to the sound of the bombs and the destruction. No, it's about the retaliation. Should Iran even have the right to retaliate? And then I think this is, I don't know if it's colonialism or the colonial mindset that, as Navid mentioned, that people shouldn't have the right to resist, but just any form of resistance is always casted as irrational, barbaric, terrorist, and so forth. And lest we forget that we have this unequal relationship with the global north. Our modes of resistance, they tend to have different capabilities than the ones that are advanced technologically and historically have been colonial countries. And so the resistance tends to be manifested in these ways that we see that Iran is doing, which is targeting the economic infrastructure that enables this imperialist attack on Iran to continue, which are the Gulf countries. And I've mentioned it a week and a half ago when I was on this show, that Iran, I mean, one can always have disagreements about the government and so forth, but I think is very smart when it comes to what they have been doing militarily in the last 3 years or so. And that is whenever they have been retaliated against attacks by the Zionist entity, they have mastered out the plan of where are the air defenses. So as Navid said, when I think the Iranian ambassador was attacked inside Syria in 2024, Iran decided to retaliate by sending arguably one of the cheapest rockets that they have. And everybody in the Western media and all these myopic, in my view, political analysts, they kept saying, oh, none of the rockets reached Tel Aviv. None of the rockets actually did any harm. But the reality is that not every single thing has to have long-term consequences. A tactic is not the same as strategy. This is a tactical win for Iran, because once you shoot a rocket at Tel Aviv and then you want to see who's going to be intercepting it, you get to see where are the air defenses in Kuwait, where are the military bases in Jordan, where are their air defenses? Is Iraq actually an independent country or still under occupation? So when they did all of that, now the 12-day war, it really showed that Iran understood the logistics and the geostrategic locations of the U.S. military bases, and now they have employed it in attacking those. So it's a long-term history. And so when you have CNN, BBC, or any of these, mainstream media run by the Ellisons, right? They tend to have a very myopic view that really try to show that, oh, it's just Iran attacking its neighbors erratically. And so even the resistance is always irrational. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I apologize, everybody. I'm in the car, so hopefully I don't drop too much. Essam, you brought up something that I think is really important about mainstream media and the general narrative for how these things work. I was thinking to myself this morning that I remember as a kid growing up in New York, and my mother would listen to the news or the news on the radio, not knowing that Ayatollah was a person, right? Like hearing the word the Ayatollah and thinking that it was some place or something that existed somewhere that I didn't, that I just didn't know what it was. I say this, and people should be clear that I also didn't know that the Tappan Zee was a bridge, right? Like you're a kid, you hear things on the radio, you have no idea like what they're talking about. But it had me thinking about language, right? And this morning in the car, they were talking about what was happening. And one of the senators who made some statement in support of like why the country's allowing this to happen, used the term Islamists. And my son was like, what's an Islamist? Like, what does that word even mean? Are they talking about Muslims? Like, what are they talking about? And it got me again thinking about language and thinking to myself that you would use the word Islamist instead of the word Muslim when you're trying to get people to associate the ist, right? Extremist, right? Terrorist. Like it's so intentional, these language choices that people make. And it's all part of this propaganda of trying to convince people that there's this evil thing out there that we have to, that the country has to respond to. They have to bring democracy. There's no democracy here, but the country's going to bring it somewhere else, right? They kill protesters here, but you're going to be concerned as a government about what happens to protesters in some other part of the country. And I'm curious about, the thought on, because one of the things that we really try to talk about here is like breaking this propaganda. And as I listened to the language and listened to the words and considered like me as a kid, like remembering what all these things sound like, I'm curious on, both of your thoughts, and Navid, you could start, like how, like what is the process that we should be doing as like a media collective, as organizers, as to kind of approach this in a way that we can get people to understand how much they think they know that is really just based on what they've been told over the years and has nothing to do with the reality of what is happening in Iran.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think I think the starting point is to make the connections, Renee, between what's happening here and what's happening over there, right? So, and I think one way to really think through that is the fact that I kind of alluded to this before, there's a tremendous decay in morale in the U.S. military to such an extent, and this is kind of speaking to something you were saying too, Renee, as well, is that to such an extent that like commanders, U.S. commanders, military commanders in the West Asia region, in Kuwait and these countries, are telling their soldiers that this is God's war. Like this is like essentially like a holy war, and that this is a religious conflict against these people who like see us as like a great Satan or whatever they call it, right? So, and this news came out a few days ago. And in fact, there were reports that like the lower ranked officers were complaining about these commanders who were saying these things, that it's a God's war, right? So the morale is low over there, right? And so to make the connection, I think, in terms of like how to portray it, in terms of to make the connection with respect to Iran, I think starting here is an important way, right? Like, because I will say for myself, I've actually felt a tremendous amount of solidarity on both, like on a particularly like on a racial, like global South type level from peoples around the world, but also peoples here in the United States, right? And I think part of that is because what is blatantly clear is that this is in fact a ruling class war, right? Like this is, as all wars are, but this is blatantly clear in the sense that very, very few people support this, support what's going on. Very like all of the cuts in education, the decay in infrastructure, like that, the housing situation, all these things, right? The people are feeling these things, and at the same time, money is being fed into like the military budget, right? To fight these wars that the U.S. is claiming are not going to last long, but then like we're seeing now that in fact like this one might, like it seems like it's going to last long. And the Ukraine war, Trump came into the presidency, came into the White House saying he's going to end that war. That war's still ongoing, right? And in fact, that war, in many respects, that war is ongoing because the U.S. is losing that war, and Russia is not going to negotiate from a position of weakness, right? And so all of this to say that, like, what are the connections between what's happening over there and what's happening over here? And I think that is the basis for like developing a framework of solidarity that then speaks to like how people can mobilize here, right? Last thing I'll say, and then Essam can speak, is that what Iran is doing in the region right now is not just targeting military installations. It is actually targeting, like, for example, Amazon Web Services data systems, right? It is targeting. I read something a couple of days ago that it targeted like a technology industrial complex in the Zionist entity that where I think Microsoft has facilities, right? And so this is an economic war as well, right? And those who might criticize Iran because they say it's not like a true leftist country or whatever, right? Iran is waging an anti-imperialist war for sure. It's also waging an anti-capitalist war, an particularly U.S. capitalist war, right? And so, like, what does it then mean to like attack these very installations that facilitate the development of AI, whereas here in the U.S., like AI facilities are moving into communities and participating in the displacement of Black and Brown communities, right? And so that is, these are the kind of connections I think can be, and I think are already being made, right? And that's why the solidarity is high. It's just a matter of like how to more organize and mobilize, right?
Yeah, thank you. Essam, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, and I think it's very well articulated. I mean, the way how these installations that are taking place in many cities and many areas where they're right now having power cuts inside the US, they're having water shortages, and then how that is the pollution, as always, is always outsourced to the third world. The energy consumption is always outsourced to the third world because it's cheaper. They have built it there. And I think one thing that you have spoken about, Renee, very well articulated, was the propaganda about this whole the war on Iran. in relation to how they speak about the events as they're unfolding. So as you noted, Navid, they are saying that this is religious war, right? This is the only way to bring up morale. And I think this is what also the Christian nationalists in the United States could support this war with the promise that Trump, to be elected, he said that he's the most anti-war and he will stop all wars and so forth. So there is that function of bringing in religion. But two quick points. The one is about the level of destruction that is taking place inside those reactionary Gulf monarchies and inside the Zionist entity will not be displayed on media. They know the morale is quite low inside those countries and will get exacerbated the international public opinion about this war if we can see the footage of what is happening in those places. The savagery and so forth that's happening inside UAE and people not, certain people can only access certain area and the elite can travel to Saudi Arabia, others can't, and so forth to escape this. That's just one layer of it. But the other layer is that they are trying to show that everything is fine, everything is normal, keep believing in the status quo. The world order is fine. Iran is just this weak, feckless country that cannot do anything. So, but they will speak about, oh, look at how many sorties the United States and the Zionists have done inside Iran, how much destruction. I mean, I just saw footage from yesterday that so many of these targets that were bombed in Iran, there were actually drawings and paintings on the ground. And if you follow war quite closely, Yugoslavia did that too when NATO launched its campaign, 78 days of bombing it back in 1999. The Yugoslav army did the same thing. They just built tanks of paper, so such that when NATO was bombing, they were just shooting paper. And so there is all of this is happening. And then there is the notion that in order to keep up this momentum, we have to keep silencing people from speaking about what is actually happening on the ground. In UAE right now, if you're on the ground and you kind of film or document any rockets or any destruction or the lack of people going out or whatever, it will actually reduce tourism and ruin the economy from the perspective of the UAE. And so they are fining people up to $50,000 if they post something that shows a rocket or shows destruction or anything like that, and up to 2 years in jail. And we know the human rights violations and everything inside UAE. And inside that country, the surveillance largely is dependent on the Zionist surveillance. And a lot of people, these international travelers and influencers, they go there and they say, once I get there, I feel so safe. Because, I mean, what does safety mean? Is that you abandon all your individual and freedom rights, right? This is what the price that they have to pay in order to feel like under this supposed utopia on top of the desert. So, yeah, and the same thing in CNN. I think 2 days ago, the two correspondents from CNN, they were just in Tel Aviv, and they were saying, "Oh, there goes another air defense missile for the Air Dome to intercept, I guess, our rocket." And then she literally told the cameraman or the camera person, "Hey, don't film there. We have been we have been commanded not to film anywhere where it shows where these interceptors are coming from." So this whole media, Western media, that has a substantial amount of journalists and investigative journalists and functionaries of imperialism and so forth, they're doing the job for the empire by not speaking about what's happening inside the reactionary monarchies and inside the Zionist entity. And that is part of this cognitive warfare that I spoke about, trying to win the hearts of minds by just silencing what's actually existing on the ground.
Thank you. So I have one more kind of major thing floating around in my head, and that's not to say that there isn't much more. I'm just going off of some of the things that most stand out to me. And one of the other things that I'd really like for us to connect is how the Western imperial core uses countries against each other until it's no longer convenient, right? So, I want people to understand that it was fine for Iraq to have weapons when the US was giving them the weapons to attack Iran 40 years ago, right? It was okay for the Taliban in Afghanistan to have the weapons when they wanted them to use them to attack Russia when that was the plan, right? And so this is a consistent thing, that we always see. I was listening to, I think it was The Lever this morning. They released a report, and they're relatively liberal, so sometimes it's hard to listen to. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was this talk about, they're going to try to arm the Kurds to see if they can get them involved to kind of agitate, in certain parts of Iran to try and cause more disruption, which of course is like playbook 101, right? Like let's create chaos where we can on the ground. And so I think it's important for people to understand that none of these things are happening. And you both said it, like none of these things are happening and starting right now, right? Like this did not start on Saturday. This is decades in the making of trying to figure out how do we find a way to destroy this sovereign nation so that we can continue our exploitation of the resources and all the things that we want to have access to. One of the other, as part of this, as I was watching, I think Hegseth was doing some interview, and he basically made the statement of like, well, Israel was going to attack Iran. And we know that once Israel attacks, like Iran is going to attack the U.S. bases. So we had to also attack, like, and the pure lack of common sense of that was like, what is happening right now? As they use each other to like manipulate, and it's just pure. When I tell y'all I struggle with this in such a way, it's hard to explain. And I tell my son all the time, when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers, right? So you have all of these imperial powers fighting, and meanwhile, it's the people on the ground that are going to suffer the most. It's the people who are just trying to live their daily lives, the workers, the children. When I think about them dropping a bomb on a school, and now Israel and the U.S. are pointing at each other to say, you dropped that bomb, you dropped that bomb. Everyone's claiming it was a mistake, but it seems pretty clear based on some of the things that I wrote that the second bomb was dropped because they dropped the first bomb intentionally to bring people to the building to try and provide aid. And then they waited and dropped the second bomb. So all of these things are all intentional. It is this intentional work to create and sow as much chaos as possible so the empire can survive. And I don't know if I'm missing anything from that kind of, like how I'm viewing these things happening. I don't know if I'm missing any large part of the history between these nations that should be pointed out. But, and we can start with you, Navid. Like, what am I missing from this, if anything, about how the imperial core strategizes to pit countries against each other so that it can completely sow chaos and then try and do what it wants after?
Yeah, so the reports that you mentioned regarding like the U.S. arming particularly the Iranian Kurds to rise up against the government and these kinds of things, right? Like I've seen these same reports. I've seen like what's her name, Clarissa Ward of CNN, who's the reporter, the CNN international reporter, who does a lot of reports in the West Asia region and does like a lot of psychological operations, I would argue, consisting of psychological warfare is what she's doing. All of this to say that there seems to be no evidence whatsoever that the Iranian Kurds are going to rise up against the government. Like, if we remember in January, when all of these riots were taking place in Iran, like the urban insurgency, right? Like there was no rising up of the Iranian Kurds at all. Like that was entirely a Mossad operation, and the Zionists, like the Israelis and the United States, they were basically hoping and begging for people to rise up, and like within a couple of days, the Iranian security forces put that down, right? Like, and so any sort of I'm not going to sit here and say that there's not going to be like actual armed militant attempts to infiltrate in Iran and things like that. Of course, that's going to happen. But like, I think we all remember like what happened with the Bay of Pigs invasion, right, in 1961, and when the Cuban exile forces went into CIA-trained Cuban exile forces went into Cuba and they were routed, right? I think anything like that would be exponentially worse than Bay of Pigs with respect to Iran. But I don't see any evidence like that Iranian Kurds are going to rise up. And so part of the playbook to me is the U.S. is, for one, it's searching for options. It's quickly running out of options, because if we remember on Saturday, the United States was saying that this is going to take 4 days, right? Like, and now, I mean, it's, we're day 5, day 6, and I read a Pentagon report yesterday saying that they might go into September, like, right? So, quickly the plans have changed, right? And so for what I'm gathering is that the U.S. is trying to figure out what its options are with respect to undermining and destabilizing Iran. And it's finding that, like, one, the Iranian people, they did not rise up against the government after the assassination of Khamenei. Like, I think all of us here could have like easily predicted that would have galvanized the Iranian people, and that's exactly what it did, right? Every night since then, there's been millions of people out on the streets, right? But nonetheless, they calculated that maybe this is a way to destabilize the government, right? And it's been it's been the complete opposite. They tried to Trump tried to offer an immediate ceasefire after the assassination. That was immediately rejected, right? And so the options, they don't have a lot of options. The United States does not have, is not in a particular position of strength. It is not in a position to dictate when and how this war is going to end, which is a major factor. Like, the strategic initiative lays with Iran at this point, and the United States is on the retreat. I mean, as much as like Renee, you mentioned, as much as they can bomb civilians, right? Double tap strikes against an all-girls elementary school, hitting a sporting complex with girl and women volleyball players, right? Like, this is what they can do: carry out atrocities against civilians. We've seen that over and over again. But when it comes to battlefield victories, like, and actually carrying out like operations that will topple the government, there has been no evidence that that's happened. And so strategically, I don't think the United States is in a strong position. Politically, like, you see, like, as you mentioned, Hegseth and all these folks, they're stumbling and bumbling at this point, like they're contradicting themselves left and right. All of this suggests to me that like they don't know the way forward, and they're trying to figure it out as they go.
Can I, Essam, did you want to jump? Go ahead.
I think just maybe you can speak a little bit more, Navid, because you know the context. But what usually when you have the United States trying to spur up these sectarian tensions within any country by supporting one group over the other, again, Yugoslavia is a great example of this. They tend to have some sort of grievances that the masses know about. Oh my God, these people are oppressed. They can't speak their languages. They cannot practice their religion. But maybe you can speak about like how in Iran that's not the case for the Kurdish population. I think it's roughly 10 million or 9 million people are inside Iran. I don't know if you know the details, but maybe you can just tell us a little bit about how that's actually myopic from U.S. intelligence standpoint to think that the Kurds are going to be standing up with U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, I mean, as you're pointing out, I don't know the exact numbers of Iranian Kurds, but like there's a large Kurdish population. There's a large Azari population in northwestern Iran. There's a Jewish population in Iran, right? Like Iran is a very ethnically diverse country, and so the calculation is that like perhaps like the United States and the Zionists can play on these ethnic and / sectarian tensions, whatever tensions that either may exist on a small level or that they might fabricate to then try to destabilize and perhaps like if successful, balkanize and partition Iran. This is a playbook. Again, has played out historically across the colonized countries around the world and formerly colonized countries. using ethnicity as a sort of mechanism to destabilize countries, right, on the African continent. But like, again, none of what we're seeing suggests that this is what's going to happen. In fact, people have come together, right? This is not to say that Iran is a perfect society, right? Like, I'm not trying to make that point, but what I am trying to say is that Iran is a society, like any other society. Societies have problems. They have, and it doesn't lead to overthrowing of government and things like that. Iran is in fact very much, I think, much better equipped to handle internal tensions than, for example, the United States. And we see the level of, or the lack of consensus that exists in the United States with what's going on and everything, right? It's the opposite in Iran right now, right? And so that shows that there's a sort of national cohesion that U.S. strategic analysts, CIA folks, the government itself, they just totally miscalculated, or they went in with a sort of semblance of hubris, particularly, for example, after Venezuela. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I would have to say about that.
I also wonder how much of them were ignored, because for a long time, it seems like those who seem to have to be the experts, even those I would consider my political enemies, have always spoken of Iran as the country not to mess with in the way that this country likes to mess with other countries. So a part of me, at least, I'm nowhere studied enough on this to speak authoritatively on it, but I do get the impression that somewhere over there somebody was like, man, this guy's ignoring us, and we didn't. This wasn't the plan. But between all the reasons that people have been coming up with for why Trump would want to green light this effort, some of which you've already mentioned, makes sense. I just wanted to raise very quickly, well, two things. One, in all of your discussion about the propaganda, I just a cursory quick look. I had noticed that the Hollywood Reporter had put out a story, I think yesterday or today, where oddly enough, they claim credit should go to Hollywood for helping change the zeitgeist over the last decade or so in terms of U.S. Opinion on Iran. And then they cite an opinion poll saying, what was it again? The percentage of Americans with favorable, quote unquote, overall opinion of Iran go from a paltry 2% in 1990 to an at least not shameful 15% in 2020. One, 15% approval rating from the United States, to the extent that anyone cares what the U.S. thinks about them, is, I think, still shameful and ridiculous. But two, the long story short, the article cites a number of films that I have not seen nor heard of, that seem, at least in part, to come from some Iranian filmmakers, but the article ignores the dominant films produced by Hollywood that make reference directly or indirectly to Iran that I think don't help. So to the extent that this opinion poll that they cite is accurate, and I think that has been in spite of what the dominant narrative of popular culture has been encouraging in terms of American opinion of Iran. So, for instance, I just again a quick look. Films like 300, where the Persians are obviously the ridiculously depicted enemy. Argo, where they not only have the Iranian backdrop falsely depicted, but then you also have Ben Affleck playing, I believe, was he a Mexican or some form? He was playing a Latino, protagonist, but of course they made Ben Affleck the Bostonian, whatever. He's perfect for that. The one going back that some of us might remember from the early 90s, Not Without My Daughter. I mean, absurdity. The stoning of Soraya, Top Gun, where Iran is the unnamed obvious enemy with the F-14 Tomcats. And then 300 Spartans comes back again. And then, of course, Homeland, the long-running TV series, where so in many ways, and then this leads me to the other question I wanted to raise for you both, and Navid, given that you know, my homeboy, you know, Ali Johnson, you know, is well, has been, I know, you know, some of you fancy academics that I'm jealous of get these nice appointment deals and relationships. So he's doing whatever he's doing. But I know a little bit about Wayne State, and I teach at an HBCU and in Black Studies as well. And so I'm curious. I'm finding these last, you know, week or so in trying to give quick primers that I was admittedly not prepared for to my students about what's going on, knowing that they are underprepared for these discussions and have often only heard of Iran in some sort of hostile juxtaposition to, you know, in film or somewhere else to the what is supposed to be the hero. I'm interested in how you've both been approaching this in terms of the classroom, and I'm admittedly wanting to create a clip that I'm going to show to my classes straight up. So you know, anyway, but also you mentioned this connection that Iran has had to liberation struggles in the global South, so and those internally colonized here in the U.S. as well. So if you could talk a little bit about any or all of that, Navid, I'll ask you to get us started, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So, yeah, so I'm teaching 2 classes this semester, and actually one of the classes, like, we were discussing.
Congratulations! I'm sorry, I gotta hate on that with my perennial 4.4. I've just gotta hate a little bit. No, but congratulations, salute.
Come to Wayne State. Yeah. So one of the classes we were actually we've been discussing like the concept of guerrilla warfare, right? And like what does guerrilla warfare entail, and what are some of the central precepts of guerrilla warfare? And one, like, so we talked about this past week, and, you know, we talked about like the importance of having strategic initiative. We talked about like, why is it that guerrillas tend to fight longer wars? Like, why do they emphasize protracted wars rather than short wars, right? And so, like, you know, thinking about, okay, you know, it's because they don't have the sufficient firepower, the sufficient means to quickly defeat their enemy, the invader, right? And so bringing that, like having that discussion, and then thinking about it in the context of what's going on right now, where like you have on the one hand the Zionists in the United States saying that they're going to fight a short war, right? And it's going to last, you know, as we said, like 4 days or whatever, like things like that. And on the other hand, the Iranians saying that we are prepared for a long war. We are prepared for a war of attrition, right? We are like we're going to be steadfast in our resistance, and this is not something that's specific to Iran. The Palestinian resistance was saying this during, you know, like during the war in Gaza, right? Like that we are fighting a war of attrition against the Zionist enemy, right? And it's because they know that this is their means to win the war, to gradually wear down the enemy, to demoralize their soldiers, but also demoralize the public back in the U.S. or, you know, like in you know, the Israelis or whatever, right? This is how the Vietnamese won their war against the United States, right? So that's, you know, that's kind of how we talked about it in one of my classes. In the other class, which is actually intro to Black Studies, you know, it was a little bit of a different discussion. It was more of a discussion in the sense of like, what are the realities that we here are facing with respect to challenges, not just like as Black and Brown people, but also like what are the challenges that our field, Black Studies, is facing? The consolidation of the Black Studies department at UT Austin, the consolidation of Black Studies at FAMU, right? Like these things are happening at a moment of like the gutting of education, while at the same time there's this expansive military apparatus that continues to like wage war against countries like Iran. So what are the relationships between these two things? Because they're not separate, right? And in fact, I had both of my classes watch parts of the Marco Rubio speech in Munich, right? And he himself is making those connections, right? So like if he himself can make the connections between domestic developments and what the US is doing abroad, then it's incumbent upon us as educators, right, to bring the connections to the students as well, right? And so that's kind of how I've been thinking about that. And then to your second question about like Iran and its, you know, support for like liberation struggles, that, you know, that's a very important question to me. So I should have mentioned at the beginning of this actually that another major reason why Iran is being attacked and has been attacked is because of its steadfast support for the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance, right? So Iran is the only country in the world that has a clause in its constitution for a permanent budget that in support of the Palestinian people, right? Like that also goes to supporting the Palestinian resistance. And it's not just Palestine. Obviously, it's other regional forces as well, whether it's the forces in Iraq or in Yemen, Ansar Allah, like supporting in the Yemeni forces against the invasion of Saudi and Emirati forces, U.S. backed, of course. You know, I saw a video the other day, a couple of days ago, of a Sudanese soldier saying that if the Iranians ask me to go fight in Iran for that alongside them, I will do it. And it's because, you know, Iran has backed the Sudanese armed forces for one, like in their war against the rapid support forces, but for two, because Iran's attacks against the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which, you know, some of us in the circle like to call it the United Zionist Emirates, the UAE has been supporting the RSF, like has been, you know, the RSF's war is a UAE war and a UAE/Zionist war, right? And so the weakening of the UAE is a good thing for the Sudanese. It's a good thing for like the entire Horn of Africa region, basically, right? And so this is not just like internationalism in the abstract of like, you know, these Western left, like so-called leftist intellectuals like to talk about it, but this is internationalism in practice, right? Establishing close relations with the Alliance of Sahel states in West Africa, right? Having close relations with Venezuela and Cuba. You know, all these again go back to why attack Iran now, or why Iran poses like any kind of threat to the existing white world order, right? And so, you know, Iran has a strong record on internationalism, and Iran has been also a recipient of internationalism, right? From DPRK in Syria and Libya, and so on and so forth. And so, you know, these kinds of relationships these are the kinds of relationships that the United States and the imperialists are trying to sever, right? They're trying to destroy, and Iran is pushing back. It's fighting back.
I think you have been stealing my lesson plans, Navid, because I'm teaching just one course that's sociology of religion, and not the soul.
One? No, I'm just playing. I'm just playing.
I'm only exploited as grad student. So, but the course is kind of divided where a professor lectures on one day and I lecture on the other day, and there was kind of like the readings where they read on Tuesdays, and then on Thursdays that's when I teach and do my own thing. So because when we talk about sociology of religion or the impact of religion on society, it's not a theology course or reading the Quran or the Bible or whatever. It's about the impact of religion on society. In the most poignant examples that people are in front of their eyes is like, oh, Iran. So from the beginning of this year, you know, January, there has been allusions to Iran, and the students have questions. And so because of the lecture nature on Tuesdays with the professor, they tend to bring all the questions on Thursday. And so, and I'm of the opinion that despite the fact that in my political organizing and everything, I have very strict opinions that we should defend imperialism and try to, like, if I meet somebody and I speak in front of them and tell them that this country needs to be defended, this government, not regime, right? This government needs to be defended because of what they're doing. In the classroom, I tend to take more of a wholesome analysis and let the students evaluate. So what I tend to do is that I speak about foreign interventions by the United States historically, the weaponization of religion. How is it that this Graham character, he literally said back in 2023 on the 9th of October, he said, we are in a religious war. Do whatever you have to do, level the place. So this is him talking about leveling the place where Palestinians are living, and this is a religious war. But then it's very funny when he speaks about like Muslim minorities in China. Oh, we need to save the Muslims, which is a CIA fabrication story about Uyghur genocide and so forth. But then right now it says this is again a religious war. We're against these Islamists, as Renee has mentioned. So I tell my students all of these things, but then at the same time, I tell them it's not a religious war. Because if it was, is it the Islamists that they hate, or is it the godless communists, as the Marco Rubio said in his speech? And so my students are learning all of these things, and how there's always as the late Michael Parenti said, famous lecture that he said, there's always religious uses of politics and political uses of religion. Religious people, they tend to use politics in order to influence what they want to do. And political people, they tend to use religion to say, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And this is very well exemplified by Trump's regime and what they're doing, that this is a religious war, right? So, and this is, again, I'm not going to graduate students who are going to be like militant anti-imperialists, but I think I just want them to know that given the current circumstances, they need to know, I know it sounds a bit liberal, but they need to know all sides of the story, but then they make the conclusion of where does humanity progress and there's peace, and actually people can survive. And in addition, I also showed them the speech, the part of the interview with the Treasury Secretary when he said that we tanked the Iranian rial overnight because of our sanctions. So, and because the students, they said they were saying, oh, the Iranian regime quelled the revolution that was happening in January, and it's suppressing its people, and people just want freedom. But I literally said, can we say what happened beforehand? And they did not know. They just heard, again, there's no historicization. So I told them that just historicize. Yes, there are, like, one can critique what's the economic conditions and so forth, but you cannot critique economic conditions just as a nation state failing at doing what it's doing. You have to put the nation state within the imperial structure and the world system where sanctions has been imposed, where, like myself, I cannot send money back home. The Iranian students who are here, they cannot send money back home. There's this whole strangle in the country. So now the students are thinking of religion sociologically, in the sense that it has implications on society, but it's being used constantly throughout history. And then I think it's also important to have those criticisms of the religious uses of politics and political uses of religion, and how the current administration in the United States, or the Epstein regime, as some people would call it, are mobilizing that for those purposes. Yeah, that was very sociology of religion focused. So
that got Jared's brain going. I don't know if you saw the eyebrows and the head moved close to the camera. That's always the sign that he's like, what? I heard it. And I apologize again. I don't know how much time we all have, but as you all were just talking about sanctions, I realized one of the things that we did not, and if we could quickly touch on it, and then I guess people are probably gonna have to go because I'm sure you all have other things to do. But we didn't speak at all, I don't think, about BRICS and the economics of all that is happening, including the intentional decision to basically bankrupt the dollar of Iran, right? Like there are all these economic things, the sanctions, and we mentioned the sanctions, but people really understanding how long this has been going on, and that there was this intentional move with regard to the dollar in Iran in order to create this complete destabilization of the economy. And I don't know if there's time enough to just quickly touch on that so that we make sure we don't overlook it. And then I think we could probably start to close up so that I don't take up all of your time. But thank you.
Yeah, so I think, it's a great question again. So, and I think as Sam mentioned, right, like part of the strategy of the United States, and this was an intentional strategy because the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said this at the Davos summit, was to remove access to the dollar for Iran, take currency out of circulation and intentionally crash Iranian banks. And in fact, that's what happened in late December of last year, which led to like currency inflation and led to protests among bazaris, among shopkeepers, right? But those protests were about like the economic situation. They were not anti-government protests, right? In fact, the government quickly decided to meet with the protest leaders and came up with an equitable and acceptable solution, right? But it was from those protests that then the Mossad agents, backed by the United States, of course, started to infiltrate the protests themselves and incite literal rioting, right? Urban insurgency. The whole discussion of like Starlinks entering the country, and so Iran removed access to internet, and in order to pinpoint like these Starlink mechanisms, machines, in order to disable them, and was successfully able to do so, right? But even beyond that, like to the question of sanctions, sanctions also means like that food and medicine cannot get into the country, right? And so like a lot of Iranians have not been able to access life-saving medications because of sanctions, right? And what that has led to is, of course, devastation, as it has so in other sanctioned countries like Cuba, Haiti, in the past, Venezuela, of course, and other countries. But what it also has led to, an unintended effect of this, is that it has again led to this, this society of resilience and ingenuity, right? So that now Iran is developing medications and technologies that are able to serve the population because it cannot access these things on the global market. It's much like what the Cubans have done with respect to their health industry, right? Like developing, a COVID vaccine, amidst this embargo in which they're not able to access the vaccine abroad, right? So this culture of resilience has defeated the sanctions regime, and to me, and that's why it necessitates these kinds of attacks, right? Because ideally, the United States would be able to topple the Iranian government without like having to hit like militarily, like economic warfare. If the U.S. had it its own way, like would be able to do the job of destabilizing the country and lead to internal toppling. That did not work. So now we see like, okay, this is part of the playbook to go to overt military strikes, and that's not working either, of course. But one last thing I'll say about this is that Iran, in fact, like what I've seen, has reversed the tables of economic warfare. What it has done in the last few days is close the Strait of Hormuz, right? Which means that fuel like oil and natural gas are not getting out of the region, which, and that's leading to major crises in Europe, and eventually, like Europe and Asia. And that'll eventually, ripple to, it is starting to ripple to the United States and North America as well, right? Like in the UK, the first 2 days after the Iranians closed the Strait of Hormuz, natural gas prices went up by over 90%. Right, that's people heating their homes, right, things like that, and it's because one of the countries that is the largest producers of natural gas in the world is Qatar, and Qatar cannot get that natural gas out, so it had to take its natural gas installations offline, right? So this kind of economic warfare, like again, it's the tables are being turned, and these I think Jared made a really good point, like I think CIA analysts in the region, even like I think there were reports of like Dan Kane, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, like these people saying that this is not a good idea, right? But the government just did not listen, and through their hubris, thought that they actually would be able to carry out something that would lead to a quick end and capitulation, right? But Iran has been ready for this, right? Has been ready for this, particularly since the 12-day war. So, like. Things do not. I just don't see how things promise to get better for the United States and for Israel in this war.
Essam, to be fair, what you sent in the private chat, we will do our journalistic duty, though there are some personal hostilities with one of the co-authors of that piece. I don't have, but I'm principled. I'm being honest and open. I'll share it if it's going to add to if we need it for the analysis. I'm not going to hold this up, but just for the record, I gotta put the whatchamacallit on it just in case.
No, it's funny that I mean, I actually respect that, and I understand these feuds tend to happen with even people who are on the left, so it's okay. But what I just sent was just documentation and proof of how the National Endowment of Democracy, which allegedly lost its funding, just like its USAID and the National Democratic Institute and all these soft power, what I call constellation of interventionism that the United States employs, they were actually funding and helping transport these Starlinks into Iran. And I mean, just to kind of situate it in the United States, imagine if there are some people within the United States are putting installations of Huawei inside the United States, right? This is how it's considered to be a violation of sovereignty, especially when the country is under attack. But I think just maybe if I can add one quick thing about BRICS is that recently, correct me if I'm wrong, Navid, Iran joined alongside Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, UAE, I think Eritrea too. They have joined BRICS countries. And I think the relationship that Iran has with Russia and China is very entangled economically. And we know that the relationship between Venezuela and China was very also strong, and they were exporting the whatever oil they could export that is easy to extract was to China, and they were able to help them refine it. But now that link has been, fissured, given the abduction of Maduro, I think it's this war on Iran, besides the fact that it's kind of a war on the global south, it's also a war on China, an indirect one, because we know the cultural component of the collaboration between the two great, amazing ancient civilizations are fighting a country that's barely 250 years old, and it's a civilization that it seems like Marco Rubio is very happy about glorifying, which is filled with holocausts and destruction and genocides, that they're trying to fissure that. And then I think, just like Maria Machado said, that once we take over the country, we're open our businesses to Americans, right? So she wants to transform Venezuela into kind of a place where there's cheap labor to be exploited, and American companies can wreak havoc on the society and the economy of Venezuela. And I think Reza Pahlavi, that monarch guy, he wants to do the same thing. And when they do the same thing, they are what a good friend of mine who has much better nuanced, Mark Neely, who has better nuanced analysis, he calls it accumulation by deprivation, or by denial, which is the idea that you accumulate by the capitalist accumulation takes place not by just taking a territory, but preventing that territory from transacting and doing deals with other adversaries. And I think this is a part of the strategy that the US has against not only BRICS and the alternative currency that they will be developing soon and so forth, and the hegemony of US dollar, but also to prevent its attack on China. So that puts things even in a more complex geopolitical situation.
Can I just quickly add to something that Essam said as well? Like, so there are reports, and take these reports like they're unconfirmed, right? But there are reports that China is providing satellite imagery to Iran to locate places to strike, right? So so there's that. But on the other hand, there's also reports that Iran is allowing Chinese-bound ships, and Chinese ships in general to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Aside from that, no other ship is getting through, right? So again, take that with a grain of salt, unconfirmed reports. But, yes, to Sam's point, there's this close relationship between Iran and China, and also Russia as well. Yes.
Thank you. I so appreciate, and I can't say it enough, I really appreciate you all coming on. Navid, if I heard correctly, you're working on a book, so perhaps we can work on getting you back on. I'm sure that Jared would also love to chop it up with you some more about this shared academia situation that you both have going.
No, I just want to hear more about this promised land of 2 courses, and no, I'm just playing. I'm just playing. Congratulate, yeah.
But it's important to me, and thank you, Jared, for making some time also to make sure that we can get this to happen, to just bring some more information and to bring to light some of the things that we just don't have time to talk about, like when you're trying to run through all the stories that are going through in the morning. But Navid, thank you. It was very nice to have you on. Hopefully we can have you back another time, maybe when there isn't so much chaos ensuing. And Essam, as you know, we already have you on cue once you're finished with your dissertation to come back and talk a little bit more about that. But is there anything that either one of you want to add, anything big that we missed over the course of the conversation before we let you go?
I'll just say quickly, first of all, a huge thank you to both, you, Renee, and Jared for inviting us to come on to talk about Iran. To me, this is in and of itself is an act of solidarity. Beyond that, I just want to, like, my last word, and I've said this elsewhere as well, is that my advice to people is do not despair. Like Iran, the resistance is doing well. So much so that there's a report today, like the Israeli reports are saying that they're going to reduce strikes because in preparation for a longer war than they anticipated, right? Other Israeli media are saying that already they're saying that the assassination of Khamenei was a strategic mistake, and so the resistance is doing well, and despite whatever, as you all have pointed out, despite whatever media we get here in this country, in the United States, in terms of what's happening in the region, despite all of the atrocities that we witness, and of course they're happening, the resistance itself is enduring, and it's remaining, and it's going to continue, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon us to not despair and keep doing the work, keep doing the good work. And so again, thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, both Renee and Jared, and thank you, Navid, for joining. Yeah, this is the first time me and Navid speak at this length ever, so maybe one day we'll meet in person.
Yes,
thank you so much, Navid. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, right on. Thank you both very much. Of course, Renee as well for putting this together, and yeah, just consider us another outlet and space for you all to continue these conversations and raise these criticisms as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, 2Fs. Everything in the West says is lies and doesn't fucking deserve to be dignified with an answer, and we will win. Right on. Thank you all very much. So folks, on our way out, please do like, share, subscribe, put a comment, put this in your socials, invite others to tap into the conversation. Again, Navid, Essam, thank you very much. Renee, thank you as well. And to the undefeated chat and everybody else, peace as always, only if you're willing to fight for it. And we'll see you with more. See you later with more Saturday with Renee.
Black Liberation Media is a collective of Black and African organizers, journalists, academics, and media personalities serving Black and African masses seeking to further grow in their understanding of themselves, their histories, and the African world through entertainment and news. Please continue to like, subscribe, and donate to the channel so we can further serve you and liberate our people. You can also go to blkliberationmedia.org, get some merchandise, and also become a Patreon member and a member from the YouTube. Please do what you can, share, and show your love as we will show ours for you. Black Liberation Media.